Today is the second session of our queer conversation series. It's quite different from our normal queer conversation series because our conversation series usually have about less than 20 people and we are engaging in conversation with one another. But because of some of the questions that have come in and all that, and we have not run a living water program this year, so we have decided to do more of a lecture style. But I hope to jazz up a little, so there will be parts that need audience participation, because I'll be asking some questions and perhaps you can respond inside, so we get a feel of the crowd, right? Know where you are. So some preamble that I want to start off with before people make a lot of assumptions. I think there'll be some people who will be watching this video, and I think that sometimes when it's not spelled out, people make assumptions. I take the Bible seriously. I believe there is authority for Christians in theological and ethical matters, and together with tradition, reason, experience, form the Wesleyan quadrilateral that informs how we understand our faith and how we live out our faith. Authority of the Bible, however, does not mean that it is perfect, nor does it mean that it's inerrant or infallible, whatever infallible means. The Bible does contain contradictions and is often inconsistent. We read the Bible literally and not literally. We also pay attention to how we read the Bible to make sense of these contradictions and arrive at what the Bible has to teach us. And sometimes what the Bible has to teach us comes through negative examples. There are two views of biblical authority. One view says that the Bible is authoritative in all of its parts and is so prior to interpretation. Since this affirmation of total authority is made before one interprets the Bible, it is assumed that before one interprets any text, this person must make an avowal, who makes such a point or who holds such an affirmation, must do so on the basis of someone else's opinion, a parent, a pastor, or a teacher. But there is the other view that says the Bible is authoritative only in those parts that are existentially engaging and compelling, that give grounding and meaning to existence. This can only be made after and in light of one's own interpretation. At the same time, it should be recognized that the Christian tradition and community are part of an individual's vocation. In some ways, some people might say this is cherry picking because we read it through our own interpretation. But I would say that both views are actually cherry picking. But the second view actually is owning the fact that, yes, I'm cherry picking, and I'm cherry picking based on this, based on certain principles, right? And the principle I go by is, how is this loving? How is this loving God? And how is this loving my neighbor? How is this just, in the light of justice? And I think that we cannot say that there is I think we need to understand that the Bible is always interpreted. The act of reading is an act of interpretation. And I'll bring you through that this evening. Interpretation of the text is always governed by context. And this context has two layers. One is the historical and cultural context of the text itself. And the second is the context of the interpreter. Our background, our cultural context, that forms our assumptions and our understanding. So there is no completely objective interpretation. So as and this preamble that frames how we start is to say that the Bible says homosexuality is a sin. The person saying it has to make a lot of assumptions before they arrive there. And this evening, I'll show you where those assumptions are, and you can make your judgment for yourself, how the process is. One of the first things I want to highlight is that a lot of times when we read the text, there are tools that help us. One of the most important tools I've used is called blueletterbible.org. It is a website that has the different versions of the Bible, different translations, but also more importantly, it has the concordance. Because the Bible is written in two languages primarily, this concordance, what used to be like a huge dictionary, shows all the words that appear in Hebrew and in Greek and its translations. So it's very helpful to use this tool. You can check it out on blueletterbible.org, and then you can click on a Bible verse, and maybe I will show you in a while when we talk about it. So before we kick off and start, I want to ask, those of you who can type in the chat box, right? I want to invite you to type, which translation of the Bible do you use normally in your daily reading or when you do Bible study? For those of you who are Christian and who, which translation of the Bible do you use? Just type in the chat, and so we can all see Amplified, KJV, ESV, NIV. Very cool. Yeah. Well, Loretta uses so many versions. SY uses NIV for OT, and the Message for NT, NLT, KJV. Okay, we do have quite a diversity, right? Translation. Shen Ting, you read the Chinese one, Didn't know that. That's cool. Okay, so we do have quite a diversity of people using different versions. CJ uses NRSV and CEB. Okay. RJ says, stop using NIV due to its historical roots in the evangelical church, so you're using NRSV. When I started on my journey, I used NIV long time ago. And when I went to seminary, my seminary used NRSV. And now I use a whole variety because I think that not one translation is perfect. And I want to compare which might be the better one. So that's a good start. So today we'll be looking at the text in the Old Testament, and the first part I want to deal with the claudical passages that has always been used to condemn LGBT, right? And the second part I want to highlight certain passages that we don't really think of as LGBT related, but they actually are, and fun to explore. But first, I want to start off with Leviticus 18 and 20, the verses, the chapters that come with the "Thou shalt not lay with a man as you will lay with a woman," right? And that's the core one that people usually quote from Old Testament to condemn homosexuality and say, here, the Bible says that homosexual acts are a sin, and God and this is condemned here. The Bible condemns it, and that's it. We need to understand first, the Leviticus 18 and 20 are part of the holiness code that runs from chapter 17 all the way to chapter 26 of Leviticus. And it is distinctive from other parts of Leviticus. Both is in its theology and its terminology. And why is it often why is it called the holiness code? Is because there are a lot of parts it says, be holy because I your Lord, am holy, right? And when we begin looking at Leviticus 18, right, there is emphasis, right, that do not do as they do in the land of Egypt and Canaan. And these two verses are talking about same-sex acts, right? It's sandwiched with all the prohibited sexual relations. You should not lay with someone near your kin, and all that. And so one of the questions that people ask is, like, we read it as all the prohibitions and we say it's a moral code. But have you ever asked, why is it necessary in the first place, right? Why is such a code needed to be spelled out? It must be that someone is doing it lah. You know, it's definitely saying something. And if we pay attention to what is going on, located in between these verses, all these prohibited sexual relations, is Leviticus 18 verse 21. You shall not give any offspring to sacrifice them to Molech and so profane the name of your Lord, right? Molech is another deity of the time. And from this verse, you can say that, what is going on? There seems to be some worshipping of Molech here. And Leviticus 20 repeats a lot of the regulations in Leviticus 18 and adds on to spell out the penalties as well. But Leviticus 20 starts off the chapter with also something pointing out that passing through the Molech starts off the chapter in verse 2, right? And this is then we need to start thinking, what is the larger context of Leviticus? One of the key words that we have here is toiba, which is translated as abomination. And I want to share with you this, my screen, so I can show you how I'm going to, so I can fold. So before I go on, this popped up this week for me from Our Bible app, and it says, faithful engagement with scripture isn't about uncovering a singular moralistic point to every text and then sticking to it, but rather the very nature of the biblical text invites us to consider the possibilities. And this is by the late Reverend Helt Evans, who passed away last year. And let me switch to this. Are you seeing my screen? No, actually you're not. Okay. Let me go back to share. Share screen. Here. Here you can see blueletterbible.org, and I was going to look for Leviticus 18. Okay. And so when I call out Leviticus 18, you can see all this, and there's a lot of nakedness here. None of you shall approach to any that's near of kin to uncover their nakedness. I am the Lord. This will be a point that will pop up later. The language at the time uses euphemisms, right? They don't directly say you have sex. Don't have sex with your near of kin. But to uncover the nakedness of someone is to actually have sex with them. The nakedness of thy father or thy nakedness of thy mother shall thou not uncover. She is thy mother, thou shalt not uncover her nakedness. So if you look further down, thou shalt not lie with mankind as with womankind. It is an abomination. We'll click here, and you can see that it will call out the text, right? It says interlinear, meaning that you have the King James Version, and you have the original Hebrew right here. And here you have the Strong's number. Strong's number is, in the concordance, every word is assigned a number so that we can look at it for reference. So when I click on Toiba, the Strong's number is 8441. You can see something, it's like a dictionary, right? And it gives you the outline of the biblical usage: a disgusting thing, abomination, abominable. A, in a ritual sense, right, of unclean food, idols, mixed marriages, or B, in ethical sense of wickedness. And then you have the Toiba, the definition, right? something disgusting morally, or an abhorrence, especially idolatry or an idol. So, and you can see the more information further down. Often toiba is used when it is in the context of idolatry. And this is one of the things that we might want to think about when we look at these prohibitions. A lot of times people claim that this application is to a wider sense, but I want to go back to the question I asked earlier. What do you think causes them to want to put these laws in here, right? Some scholars actually have suggested that it's actually about some of the practices of idolatry, like cult worship that involves maybe sex or orgies, right? There's no clear evidence of that because we don't know for sure. But looking at the context of the text, right, it's telling them don't behave like the people from Egypt and the people from Canaan. And this is the suggestion, right? And sandwiched in all this is references to Molech, which really, for me, suggests that this is this presents a larger picture of talking about some form of cult worship, right? If you think about it, it's not a general practice of any culture to practice incest. Incest is a taboo almost in every culture that we know of, then and now. And here, this prohibition might be pointing at the practice that is done during these cult orgies, that everything gets mixed up, right? So this is a possibility of the context that it's condemning with. There's another thing that I want to point to, right, is we also need to understand the rules that they put in place, because that reflects their theology and their understanding of the universe, right? So not just sex between two men is considered an abomination. Lobsters and shrimp are also abomination, right? Sea creatures must have fins and scales, otherwise they are an abomination. Land animals with cleft hooves must chew the cud, otherwise they are forbidden, right? So they do not eat pigs because pigs have cleft hooves but do not chew the cud. Camels chew the cud but they don't have cleft hooves. And birds must eat fruit and seeds. So birds that eat meat, right, carnivorous birds, are also considered impure. This thinking is shaped by how they understand the created universe to be. The world needs to be following a certain set of rules. It needs to be very clear. A is A and B is B, and they fit in certain classes. Therefore, the mixing of two materials, wearing garments made of two materials is considered wrong, right? And one of the interesting things is, in Leviticus 13, verse 13, it talks about skin disease. It's often translated as leprosy, but I don't, scholar says that it's probably a skin disease and not leprosy that we understand today. If the person has a patch of this skin disease, that person is considered unclean. However, if the whole body is covered with this skin disease, then he's considered clean. So from this rationale, we start to understand their concern about purity and about fitting into a certain class, fitting into a certain box. If you're A, you need to behave like A. If you're B, you need to behave like B. The order of things in the universe needs to fit in these, like if you are part of this class, you need to behave in a certain way. So sea creatures, you need to have fins and scales. Yeah. So even the idea, did someone unmute? Yeah, thank you. So one of the things is like the Hebrew word for woman is nekubah. And it actually, it's, I think, quite offensive to me right now, but it actually means the bearer of an orifice, a hole bearer, the person who has a hole, right? The person who is being penetrated. So the idea, the fundamental image of a woman was someone who is meant to be penetrated by the man in sexual intercourse. So in this concept, for a man to sexually penetrate another man is mixing and confusing what they see as the class, right? A male is meant to be the penetrator, the female is meant to be the penetrated. And this man lying with a man, as if you are with a woman, you are lying with a woman, is breaking that rule. That's why it's toiba, right? There is no prohibition about women laying with women, because when it comes to sex, they don't think about these things. They don't think about women at all. It's about who is doing the penetrating, right? And the thing is that one of the questions that they ask, right, is when you look at the text in Leviticus, you have to ask why is also concerned with sex with animals. Is this also part of a cult practice that you, as part of the worship of a certain deity, you sleep or you have sex with an animal which represents the deity? So there's a question there, because it's in general not something that is practiced, right? And something that we need to think about. So before I move on to something else, I think that the scriptures, from my perspective, do not offer any prohibition to loving same-sex relationships, because in the same-sex acts are prohibited because of cultural norms and the desire for what they understand as the established order, right? And in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, because during Jesus' time, a lot of the Jews were actually in the diaspora. They were Greek-speaking and they may not understand Hebrew. It's very much like a lot of the Chinese, Singaporean Chinese, whose Chinese is not so good, right? The Toiva in Leviticus 18 verse 22 is translated as Bliligma, which is a ritual offense. But it could have used, the translators could have used other Greek words, whether it is anomia, which means violation of law or sin, or porneia, which is evil practice, or aserbia, which is ungodliness. This translation seems to see it only as a ritual offense, right? And in Ezekiel, the word toiba was translated as the other words, anomia, when it's talking about acts like idolatry, child sacrifice, adultery, and in other parts, in Proverbs, toiba was translated as porneia. So there's some considerations to think about when we talk about toiba, and in Leviticus, where it is supposed to describe two men having sex is considered an abomination. So let me look at all the messages in the. Okay, thanks for all the reactions. I want to ask your question, and I don't know. How many of you have tattoos? Just type yes or no in the chat. Y or N. Felicia has a tattoo. Yes, I remember. No, no, yes. No, 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 yes. Okay, not many of us are. I think it's in the in the millennials, there seem to be more and more of them because on the streets, I see a lot of people with very, very large patches of tattoos on their hands or on their legs, right? So, do you know that in between Leviticus and 18 and 20, there is a prohibition in Leviticus for tattoos? Yes or no? Do you all know that there is that in Leviticus 19, the Bible says that tattoos not okay? Michael says, yeah. WX say yes, haha, yeah, and you have a you have a tattoo, right? Yeah. Yes, I know, but still got it. Yes. So the verse is actually from Leviticus 19, verse 28. It says, "You shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, nor tattoo any marks on you. I'm the Lord." So why is this verse in the Bible, and why is this sandwich between 18 and 20? And I think that part of this is that tattoo back in those times were not fashion. They were part of religious practices, most likely, right? So as a part of religious worship or being of worshiping a certain deity, you have these tattoos tattooed on you. And so that may be why it is banned. But one of the interesting thing is I actually went on the website from some of the conservative websites, right, like crosswalk.com, and it has actually a page for, is it biblical for Christians to get tattoos? And this is what they say, right? The short answer is nothing, at least not definitive. The Bible makes no specific reference to tattoos as we understand them in modern times. Some Christians condemn all tattooing as immoral because God clearly forbids them in Leviticus 19, verse 28. Since the word tattoo does appear in this verse in some popular English translations, this argument seems straightforward. For example, the NIV reads, "Do not cut your bodies for the dead or put tattoo marks on yourself, I am the Lord." Other Christians say this passage no longer applies to us because it's Old Testament law and not for Christians. If you go online to try and answer the tattoo question, you'll see both approaches and contradictory conclusions. Both of these approaches, however, are misleading because, as we will see, the answer to the tattoo question is that the Bible has nothing clearly to say about the practice of injecting ink under the skin to form permanent pictures, patterns, or messages. Leviticus 19 verse 28 literally translates, "And a cutting for the dead you will not make in your flesh, and writing marks you will not make on you, I am the Lord." The word writing refers to inscribed or engraved symbols or words and used only here. The word for marks, also used here alone, has an uncertain root, so we are not really sure what this word means. Further, the word tattoo did not enter into the English language until the late 1700s. This is probably why the KJV, written in the early 1600s, is closer to the literal translation saying, "Ye shall not print marks on you." And I find this very interesting because this is very similar to the argument when we talk about same-sex acts in the Bible, in Leviticus, right? Because the word homosexual did not enter into our Bibles until the translation of the Revised Standard Version in 1946, right? I think that I've sent there's a link to the story about the translations, and I think they're writing a book on it, and they're making a documentary on it as well. I think, Pauline, you can share that link below. I think it's from, let me see my document, right? It is actually from Kenyon Walker Connections, when the word homosexual was first introduced in the Bible, and that's 1946. And other translations started to get the same idea, and the word homosexual started appearing. But of course, the NRSV corrected itself. I don't remember which year, maybe in the 80s or the 70s, to be more accurate, because they found that it was not accurate in to say that it's homosexual, right? So that's I think they changed it to sexual perverts and sodomites. And so this is the challenging thing on some issues where they are supportive of. It seems the conservatives are very quick to say that this contextual, we don't really have the word for it back then. This is the context. The context of tattooing back then was about worshipping other deities. It's about idolatry. And then today, it is not about the same thing. And then when you want to get tattoo, you need to prayerfully enter into it. Is it glorifying God and all that? And so there seems to be double standards here. But the language and argument used about tattoos are very similar to the arguments that pro-LGBT folks, right, interpret Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20 as well. I want to take a breather. If you have any questions, maybe you can type in menti.com and I can take a look at it now. And I can, before I jump into another verse and all that. Yeah. Is this going too fast for all of you? Oh, I don't see any questions typed in no questions from the audience list. Is it open? Are you able to type the questions into menti.com? Yes, RJ. The first, is about establishing the Israelites. The Torah is meant to differentiate the Israelites from the others in the area, and so yes, and so they want to differentiate themselves by not doing certain things that other people around them are doing. For SY, doesn't the NT free us from OT regulations? I think that we need to be very careful to have this approach where, because the New Testament, all the rules are rewritten, Jesus abolished and overturned all those rules. I think that way of reading the text or explaining away why we don't follow certain laws is a very simplistic one. And I think that we need to understand why those laws are not followed, and don't just say that, okay, it's written away, right? So yes, I totally get you, because some pastors in Singapore also have tattoos. Not me, but some pastors. Yeah. Okay. Okay. From one of the questions that popped out is, are there no homosexuals during this time? I must say that we must be very, very clear that the idea of gay, homosexual is a very modern one, right? As an identity, that I can live my life with a same-sex partner, right? That's the idea, right? So back then, people don't have that conceptualization. They probably have a desire or attraction to people of the same sex, right? But they do not see it as an identity. They probably did a lot like the people in in probably previous generations. They probably got married and did whatever they are inclined to on the side. They explore their sexuality in other relationships outside of what they are required to do, right? Outside what they are required as a male. I'll speak on a male perspective first. As a male, you need to start a family, you need to, and so what if you have done all that, whatever you do on site, especially when you have power and all that, nobody bothers, right? And as a woman, maybe that's the if you are married to someone, what you do hidden may remain hidden, right? So that's the thing. There are no, I don't think that homosexuality, where you have a same-sex couple living together, is something that's very widespread or seen, right? There is no such conceptualization. So when these acts happen, they are happening within certain, that they are, what people are aware of same-sex acts between men, especially, are in certain contexts. So what will people be aware of? We need to be very clear. What are the circumstances where two men are having sex? What are those situations? If everything is done secretly, how would you have found out? How will it be common knowledge, right? So I would suggest that there are actually two. One, we already talked about, same-sex acts happening within pagan worship, right? Or worshipping other deities is part of their ritual. That is a possibility, because there are verses in the Bible that refer to sacred or temple prostitutes, right? Male temple prostitutes and female temple prostitutes. There's no evidence to show that it really happened, right? It could be that the writers of the text use it as a way to insult them, but right now we don't have real concrete evidence that temple prostitution really happened at that time, right? The archaeology has not found conclusive, 100% sure evidence, right? There are possibilities, but if you look at the layout of a temple, these are the rooms. You only can guess what the rooms are for. It could be used for something totally different. So we have no clear evidence, no 100% clear evidence, and people need to be very need to have the understanding. So even like after listening to this, I would tell you that there is no 100% conclusive evidence to show one thing or the other, but I'm offering possible readings and possible interpretations and exploring the context where it comes from. The other context actually comes from the next passage that I'm going to dive into, that is Genesis 19. Now I want to ask, how many of you have read Judges 19? Judges 19, not. So if you have read Judges 19, type yes. If you have not read Judges 19, you type no, no. And then we can see, how many people have read through Judges 19 and Judges 19 and Genesis 19. So WX is no, Matthew is no, Loretta is no, yeah. Jency no, Charlene no, Jane. Jay, how can you say no? You went through living water 13 years ago. I should have gone through that 13 years ago. Jonathan also no. Wow. I thought that it would be something that we're all sort of gone through. Hey, no, it's not judging. Basically, I thought that I've gone through some of them for living water and some of the texts that we've gone through. Okay, so a lot of people have not gone through, right? But forgotten already lah. Yeah. So one of the Judges 19, don't judge me lah. I'm not making people malu lah. Just point. Yeah. So I'm not trying to put anyone, stressed out. Like you forgot things and whatnot. No judgment, no judgment. Sometimes I also forget. So Judges 19 is a story about the Levite whose concubine ran home, right? And he went to the concubine's father's place, the father-in-law's place, to get the concubine to go home with him. So after the long story, right, at the father-in-law's place, the father-in-law asked him to stay one more night, and then finally, after I think 3 or 4 days later, he finally made his way back home. But of course, making his way back home isn't isn't a 1 hour affair. It takes, it took him some time to travel, and it was reaching nighttime on the way back. And the servant actually asked him, we need to look for somewhere to stay, right? Because during that time, if you're exposed to elements, you'll die. This is the environment back then. And back then, there's no hotel, no inns, no whatever. And this is what happened. Right? He went to the town. They wanted to stop at a certain town, but he said, no, this is not our people. We'll go further and we'll stop in the town of the Benjamites, right? Because they are one of the 12 tribes of Israel, our own people, and then we'll rather stay with our own people. So that reveals something about what's going on back then. When he reached the town, he actually went to the town square and waited. And an old man actually approached him and asked him to, if he needs a place to stay for a night. And he says, yes, I have all the necessary provisions for myself and the horse, I think. And we don't need anything from you. We just need the shelter. And so he stayed with the old man. But that night, guess what happened? The townspeople came and demanded to know the Levite. Doesn't that sound familiar? That's what happened in Genesis 19, right? The men from the town of Sodom went up to Lot's house and demanded that to know the two strangers, right? This is the same thing that happened. So, however, the old man didn't offer his daughters, right? But the Levite actually threw his concubine out. And, trigger warning, we talk about sex and sexual violence. And the concubine was raped till morning. And then the next morning, she was lying on the threshold of the house. The Levite put her on the horse or the donkey, I think, brought her home, and then cut her into 12 pieces and sent the 12 pieces to the 12 tribes of Israel, telling them what an evil thing that has been done by the Benjamites. And the 11 tribes actually turned against the Benjamites, and that started a civil war, right? There's more to that story. If you're interested, and you should go and read Judges 19. Judges 19 has not been used to condemn homosexuality, not based on my knowledge at all. And those people who say that Sodom and Gomorrah, Genesis 19, condemns homosexuality, then they should read Judges 19. Because here, both stories are almost identical, right? You have a foreigner in a foreign town who was accosted by the people from the town. Number two, the two people who offered shelter to the traveler were also not from that place, right? Lot was not from Sodom, and neither was this old man in Judges 19. They were both foreigners, and they behaved more righteous, more just than them. Because this is the law of that time, right? This is a customary law that when you have a traveler who's hanging around the town square, you know what they're after. This person needs shelter. This person needs shelter from the elements for the night. And you need to, this is the law of hospitality, you need to offer this person lodging for the night so that they will not suffer in the elements, they will not die. This is the basic law of hospitality that exists at the time. Now, these two situations sound like they are so similar that one, I think, is a historical or something that has happened, and one account is the mythologized version, the version made into a story. Either that, or this happens so often that they have to tell a story about it, right? This must be something that keeps happening again and again and again. Just like African Americans getting shot by the police again and again and again. That it becomes almost like commonplace, right? It's something that happens again and again and again and repeatedly. There's a systemic problem here. This is about inhospitality, about xenophobia, about the lack of love for one's neighbor that is in the story. Judges 19 and Genesis 19 is not about homosexuality. It's not that the town is so wicked and they're all full of gay men and they're all partying all night and then they want to rape every traveler who travels there. Because this sexual violence is not about sexual desire, but this sexual violence is about power. It's power over a stranger. This is about showing that humiliating you, right? It is about putting you in your place. What we can compare to is this like a lynch mob. They want to show you in your place. I'm better than you. So the crowd incites the violence, and the sex is not, it's incidental. The sex is to show you that, you know, I can do anything to you. And what in that, even in our modern, even today, one way of humiliating a man is to make him a woman by raping him. This is done after wars, and the prisoners of wars are tortured and raped. But given our context today, right, in the past, there's no concept as gay, right, and straight. It's just the penetrated and the penetrator, right? But today, we have the idea that gay. So if you're involved in the sex act, even if you are the penetrator, you're also gay. So now today we see that the sexual violence on men are starting to shift. So instead of physically penetrating and raping another man, they used implements to do so. So in Russia, when gay men were beaten up, they were actually use beer bottles to penetrate them, to torture them, right? This to humiliate them, make them a woman. But because now if you participate, you also get tainted, right? You become gay also, right? So they use other implements to do so. The same case happened with the patient man who was arrested by the NYPD, and he was sodomized with a broomstick, right? When they were under the custody of the New York police. This was a very big case. Why didn't the police take part in the rape? They raped him with a tool, right? Because now in today's context, if you participate, you are also labeled gay. But this is about humiliating and degrading another human being, right? And the way that you humiliate a man then and now is raping them. So the context of Judges 19 and Genesis 19 is about rape as a form of humiliating a stranger, a foreigner, and it's about xenophobia, right? The lack of hospitality. I will take a pause here to see if there are any questions. I think that if you're not typing it on the, perhaps you all want to type it on the, oh, I do have, can enter question. Yes, so can enter question. I can take a look at the questions. The first one. If we are to say some prohibitions in Leviticus are still valid and some are not, how do we decide which ones are still valid? That's a very good question. At the end of the day, what did Jesus say? Jesus said that on these two laws, all the laws and the prophets hang, right? Which are the two laws? Loving God and loving our neighbor. And we need to, if these two are, of course, loving God becomes very vague, right? Some people will say loving God is not acting out on your same-sex attractions, right? And that's loving God. then that becomes a circular argument, right? I think that that's something that we need to think about. But I would say that if we can look at how is it loving would be important. Many mainstream conservative Christians say rules and laws in Leviticus are classified in ethical, ritual, and judicial. They insist that same-sex acts fall under ethical law that's not excluded. That's quite BS, because I think that the modern understanding of ethical, ritual, and judicial, right, comes from our own lens. To the Israelites back then, right, they were the same. That's why they observe they follow the law so strictly, because they are all the law. They didn't make any differentiation whether this ritual, ethical, or judicial. They didn't make a difference. We are the ones who made it different. So how come these things are in one? So when they say that some things fall under ethical law, then who's doing it? Who is doing the classification? We are doing the classification. Then whoever is fitting them into what I accept will be ritual, what I don't accept is ethical, judicial. At the end of the day, just like what we were talking about earlier, right? We need to think about how is it loving, right? Just now there was it WS who said, yeah, the regulations from the Old Testament we are free from it. We are free from following the letter of the law, because Jesus pointed to the spirit of the law. We need to understand the spirit of the law and what is it trying to address. Then we will know how to follow, what law to follow. Because there are Jesus purposely broke Sabbath law, which, the penalty is death, He broke Sabbath law to prove that saving lives, healing, doing good is higher than observing the Sabbath law. The man is made, the man is not made for Sabbath, but Sabbath made for man, right? Likewise, the laws help us to understand, and we shouldn't follow the laws blindly. We need to understand the spirit of the law. And once we understand the spirit of the law, then we know what is ethical and what's not, right? I think that when we talk about sexual ethics in part 4 of our conversation, then this will pop up again. But the problem is that we have to own the process of discerning for ourselves what is the right thing to do. We have to take responsibility. It is not doing away with, no more law already, don't have to follow. We have to discern for ourselves what is the right thing to do. For example, thou shalt not kill is in the top 10 list, right? It is in the 10 commandments. But would there come a point that we need to kill to observe a higher law? I don't know. I pray that the day will not come for me. But for Dietrich Bonhoeffer, prominent theologian during the World War II, he was part of a plan to assassinate Hitler. To him, killing Hitler was something that he needed to do, even though he has to break the law of not killing, because it is of a higher good, right? Because Hitler was evil. So this is yeah. So Michael asked, do you think it's harder for LGBT to discern what is permitted and what's not permitted? Oh, of course. I think that that's something that we need to wrestle with. But I think that for straight people too, they need to, because it's very easy to adhere to the law and follow everything by the book, right? But breaking away from it and discerning for yourself what is right and what is wrong, it's actually not an easy thing to do, I think, even for straight people. Yeah. Let me see other questions. Any material book help us? Well, there are book studies that you can get hold but I need to think of which ones are good because I didn't think of looking at just the focus of the materials that I did was more for these books that we have done. Okay, any more questions? How could interpretations change with time? Interpretations can change with time because with better understanding. I think the human race has gained a lot more knowledge and understanding of how the universe works, right? In the Bible, the world was flat. The world is flat, sorry, is flat. But we don't read it as a literally now, right? The church defended that the universe was revolved, the sun revolved around the earth, right? And labeled Galileo a heretic because he advocated a heliocentric solar system. But today, no one's arguing against that. Our interpretation change with deeper understanding and knowledge. And one of the deeper understanding and knowledge is about LGBT, right? That some of us are born this way. Right? I think God created everything in diversity. The question is homosexuality in animals is also rarely talked about. Given that there are billions of us on Earth, one would expect some diversity in gender or sexuality. You know, there are animals with multiple genders and not just two. There are animals that reproduce asexually and you know, if there's no male, the female reproduce asexually, right? Those of you who watch Jurassic Park will know the lizards can reproduce asexually, and that's what happened, right? And so we need to understand that our understanding of nature is actually quite limited. And homosexuality exists in animals, and some animals can change sex. Some animals exist in multiple genders, not just one, not just two, and more. And we need to open our minds to something way beyond. I think God created diversity, and not just the other day we were saying, right, not just day and night, but also dusk and dawn and the in-between, the twilight, which is neither day nor night, the areas that flow in between, the whole spectrum. And the rainbow isn't 7 colors. The 7 colors bleed into one another, right? So we need to see that there are things that don't fit neatly in categories as we understand it. If non-straight cis people have always existed, why weren't they mentioned in the Old Testament? Ha ha ha! You say don't have, huh? I'll show you in a while's time. Okay, this is what I'm really excited about, because a lot of times our eyes are obscured. We don't see what we have seen, right? Because we read the Bible in only a very limited way, right? So now we are going to do a little fun exercise. I wonder how many, those of you who have the NIV Bible can take a look at the NIV Bible. And I want to read from Genesis chapter 37. Anybody on the ball has Genesis chapter 37? And I think yours should be able to share screen, right? I don't know if I limited it to just hosts. Let me take a sip of this drink. Thank you.
I can read, but I can't share screen.
Oh, you can't share screen. Okay, let me give you.
I've got a hard copy, old-fashioned book in front of me.
Thank you, Michael. Michael,
Genesis 37 what?
Read verse 2 and 3, maybe. I think.
Yeah. This is the account of Jacob. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age. and he made a richly ornamented robe for him.
Okay.
Enough?
You see the footnote there, the A? Will you show what A is? Scroll down and see what A says.
The meaning of the Hebrew word is uncertain.
Right? And traditional rendering is a coat of many colors. This is Genesis 37 verse 3. It also appears in verse 23, in 37 verse 32. So for many of us, this is Joseph in the Technicoloring code, right? Now, let me show you. I will take over the sharing of screen, I think. Then I will show you what I'm going to do next. Okay. I love playing with this. So you all can learn how the actual process of how I do this. Right. So I'm going to go to, what again, Genesis 37. Okay. Genesis 37 verse 3. You see I'm clicking on it and it says the many colors, right? The Ketoneth Park. Now I'm going to click on this word, Ketoneth. It is translated as a coat or a garment or robe, a tunic, undergarment, a long shirt-like garment, usually of linen. Now, you can see that it appears in Genesis 3 verse 21. No, sorry. The word Ketoneth appears in 3:21 because it's a coat of skins, right? But Genesis 37, 3, verse 3, 23, and 31 all have this code. Now, where else does this appear? Oops. It also appears in 2 Samuel, chapter 13, verse 18, verse 18 and 19. Now, when we look here, it is also a Ketoneth Park. Ketoneth Park. She had a garment of diverse colors. This is Tamar's robe, David's daughter, one of David's daughter. Now let me go back to the verse. What does it say? She had a garment of diverse colors upon her, for with such robes were the king's daughters that were virgins apparelled. Then his servant brought her out and bolted the door after her. And Tamar put ashes on her head, rent her garment of diverse colors that was on her, and laid her hand on her head and went on crying. This happened after Tamar was raped by her brother Amnon. Right? Yes. So what she did was that she ripped the sleeves off the robe, almost like signifying that she had been violated. Now, what did the NIV footnote say again? We have no idea what this word means. The Ketoneth Park, they had no idea. Here in the text itself, it explains what a Ketoneth Park was. It was a king's robes that king's daughters who were virgins wore. It denoted the status both as a virgin and as a king's daughter. It's a princess dress. And what does NIV say? No, we don't know what it means. That's rather dishonest, because I would say if I were putting on the lens, right, like I'm translating, and how come Joseph was wearing a princess dress? If I think that maybe he's not wearing a princess dress, maybe they used the wrong Hebrew word for it, or it's describing something else. It is totally dishonest to say that I don't know what it means when later on it appears. I would think that the honest scholarly thing to do is to say that this was referred to as a princess dress in 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 18 and 19. But here, we don't know what it means because it's used on Joseph. Right? Do you all agree with me? That because that's being the honest and scholarly thing to do, right? The right thing to do is to say it was described as A in this part, in 2 Samuel, it is a princess dress. Here we don't know what it means because it's referring to Joseph. But could it be possible? Could it be possible that Joseph was cross-dressing? He was a younger son, he was doted upon, and he got everything he wanted. And, you know, the father just wanted to give the son everything and even a dress, okay lah, you know, I'm okay. It is a possible interpretation. It's a possibility that also Joseph wasn't just bullied because he had dreams and dreamed bigger than his, you know, that he would lord over his brothers, but also he was non-gender conforming. He wasn't like the rest of them. He was different. And he was bullied because he was different. And this dress, this coat was significant because this was the very symbol that this was the very thing that they brought back to the father and putting animal blood on it, right, to show that, no, he got killed and all that, when they actually sold him to slavery. It was of this dress that is significant. So this meaning has been obscured by translators. I will not say that it is the correct interpretation, but it is a possibility. We cannot prove, at the end of the day, we cannot prove that it is the address, right? It could very well have a different meaning in Genesis compared to 2 Samuel. But it is the same Hebrew word, the ketoneth part. So I think that we need to take off our heterosexist lens because we are conditioned to read the Bible in a very heterosexist way. We are conditioned because we grew up in a heteronormative world. So everything we read it as though it's heteronormative. But it could be something that is different. And the something that is different, I want to point also to the relationship between David and Jonathan. Because often people say, oh, there are no LGBT characters in the Old Testament. Well, here's one, right? Here is Joseph who wore a dress. The evidence seems to be I will weigh the evidence more clearly on the side that it is a dress. Because I have the Bible, explaining what a ketoneth part means, right? In 2 Samuel, then it is something else. But the relationship between David and Jonathan is also very interesting, right? I've asked you all to, in the email I sent out, I've asked some of you to, slides, sorry, I need to look at the, I have to look at my texts. So when we look at David and Jonathan, what kind of relationship do we see it as? And I want to invite you to type in the chat box, what do you think what kind of relationship do you think David and Jonathan had? Okay, just make sure that my messages are scrolling. close. Michael says that they have a close relationship. SY says bros, right? Romance. Lots of people saying it's romance. Mainstream churches say that they are very good friends. I think David took psychological ownership over Jonathan's family. Quite accurate. When I was younger, first heard of that, I thought, wow, two boy best friends that sound a lot like love. BFF. Okay, that's what most people think of. Clarissa says, love the story of Jonathan and David when I was in the closet. The thing is, we often think of David and Jonathan as BFF because that's how we've been shaped to read it. Because we cannot fathom David, one of the key characters in the Old Testament, right? To have a boyfriend or to have a male lover, right? And that's what constrains our understanding. I cannot do the same experiment as we did many years ago. But many years ago, what we did actually was we took the story of David and Jonathan and we changed the names of the characters, right? We changed the names of the characters to gender-neutral names like Jamie, because Jamie can be male or female. We have Jamie, Jamie Oliver, and in our church, there's also Jamie, right? One of our board members. So we changed the names to gender, names that sound like either gender or can be used for both genders. And we read through the story and we asked everyone, what was the story about? And people came back and a lot of people read the story as a Romeo and Juliet story. That is quite not that surprising given the intimacy between them. But that is the nature, right? When you read without the lenses, Leslie was one of the names that we used. When we remove the lenses that we normally read by, we see the story, the narrative as something more. But why? Why when we put back the name David and Jonathan, it cannot be but just BFF? Why are we limiting that in the first place? So one of the, and what I'm going to say is even more surprising, because in my time, one of the books that I came across and I have, it's called Jacob's Wound. And it's a homoerotic narrative in the literature of ancient Israel by the late Theodore Jennings he taught in Chicago Theological Seminary. And the thing about how he saw the story was there's a lot of homoerotic narratives during that time. And male love between did exist as between warriors, and often between a warrior and his shield bearer. And guess what? What was David acting as to Saul, right? And I want to draw your attention to certain parts, right? That one is, it's quite interesting that Saul there were two introductions of David to Saul. One is that in 1 Samuel chapter 16, David became Saul's armor bearer, right? And then in the following chapter, in chapter 17, when David was going to return from killing Goliath, right? Saul asked him, "Whose son are you, young man?" As though Saul didn't know David. So there seems to be two different introductions between Saul and David, and there seems to be several stories that are pieced together. But one of the significant stories, what parts that came up is in chapter 20, verse 30. Jimmy, can you help me share that verse? 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 30. Saul says to Jonathan that Jonathan had chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness, right? Thank you, Jimmy. Yeah. Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan. You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to shame your mother's nakedness? Where have we heard this nakedness thing come about? Just now when we were talking about Leviticus, right? Uncovering the nakedness is having sex. But why that Jonathan choosing David is the shame of his mother's nakedness? How does that make sense? So, this is always seen in the perspective of, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your father. That is the nakedness of your mother. She is your mother. You shall not uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is your father's nakedness. So when Saul got angry at Jonathan, could it be possible that he's saying that you have chosen to be with David, who is my armor bearer and my lover in a way? And in a way, he's saying in this indirect way that you are uncovering your mother's nakedness, which is my nakedness, by choosing to be with David. Do you all feel like shocked or what? Because if you read it from that perspective, then David, Saul, and Jonathan, there is a love triangle. Of course, it's convoluted. He's not directly saying it, right? He's indirectly saying it. But then when you read all the context, like why did David had two opportunities to kill Saul and yet not kill him at all, because they were lovers too. There was something more than just a king and a general, or there is something more to their relationship. So that is the some thoughts that you might have, right? And when you read David and Jonathan's final meeting, they made an arrangement, right, that if they got an archer to shoot an arrow. If it lands here, then you're safe. If it lands there, then it's not safe. But then after that arranged message, or like a code, right, they still ran and meet each other at the end. It's like, wow, like extra, right? Why do you have to arrange to have a secret message method? Oh, if the arrow lands there, then it means A, then then you need to run away. But yet, even after that, both of them, ran and met each other. That is the kind of relationship that they have. And that's more than just BFF, right? And one of the interesting things is in verse 41, right? As soon as the boy had gone, David rose from beside the stone heap and prostrated himself with face to the ground. He bowed 3 times, and they kissed each other and wept with each other, and David wept the more, right? The footnotes indicate that the meaning of David wept the more is uncertain, right? In some translations, it translates as they kissed one another and wept with one another until David exceeded. The Hebrew word gadal means that is to make large, right? Or to magnify, to lift up, to have greater. And we wonder what that uncertain phrase mean. Often whenever someone says the phrase in uncertain, it's actually, I feel that it's often euphemisms. Euphemisms that people use back then that we no longer use. It's just like to lay with somebody or to bait somebody is a euphemism for sex. There are certain things we don't talk about in polite conversation. We use other words, to substitute, make love. I'm trying to think of more substitution, right? And here, when it's uncertain, it could very mean that something happened between the two of them. This is their very last meeting with one another, right? Like Francesca just said, right? Like roof and feet, right? Yeah, uncover the feet of somebody, right? Yes. So this is something that we don't know. Could it be that David had an erection because something got made bigger? We don't know. Could there be censorship over, years of translation and years of passing down? We don't know, because this story is really homoerotic to a very large degree. And finally, the final, if sex between men was hidden, it's not so surprising. The language is convoluted. Yeah, it's true. And finally, the one that really I want to leave you all with is when we have when Saul and Jonathan died, right? In the first chapter of 2 Samuel, right, the following book, right, David lamented their death. He composed a lament for them. And verse 26 says, Jonathan lies slain upon your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Greatly beloved were you to me. Your love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. And we can say it's BFF lah, right? We can say they are best friends. But why on earth does David have to compare Jonathan's love for him with the love of women? Why is, if we compare apples and oranges and oranges, right? We don't compare apples with oranges. So like in our relationships, we compare friendships with friendships. We don't compare friendships with our romantic relationships. It's two different classes, right? If this exceeds that class, then there must be something else going on as well. And it is, while this is not conclusive that David and Jonathan had have a homosexual consummated relationship, but these are possibilities. Just like I cannot prove to you conclusively that they had a relationship, they have a gay relationship, that I would say that the reverse cannot be conclusive either. Nobody can conclusively say that David and Jonathan are just best friends. They must admit to that possibility as well, because there is no evidence to totally prevent that interpretation, to write off the interpretation. But I have enough evidence to say that there's something going on here. It is very, very suspect. It's more suspect than anything else. This is the approach that I go by. We cannot conclusively conclude anything because we don't have a time machine and go back there and observe exactly what happened, right? But from the text, there is evidence to point to certain things. It cannot be just written off by saying that, no, they are straight, therefore there's nothing going on. That's not basing on evidence in the text. There is something going on. We cannot prove it conclusively, but there is evidence. There are things that jump up that point towards that. I hope you get what I'm trying to say here. right? I'm not adding anything extra into the text. It is there. And I wonder why it is left there, right? Let me flip back to any questions that you all may have. So I already presented to you some gender non-conforming characters. And I feel that David and Jonathan and Saul, they have a relationship. And I would think that it was sexual given the context of the times and the practices of the times between armor bearers and the warriors they serve, and even the textual relationship, the relationship between David and Jonathan, which is quite special, right? Now back to the questions. So this, I think, was referring to previous questions that women are being made the benchmark for being the lowest caste and reference for degrading a man. That is correct. Women were, women were property back then, right? And we need to be very careful about what the context where it comes from. So by making a man a woman, even today, right? Sometimes when some men joke around, right? Make you a woman, then you know. Well, this is based on this concept of hierarchy in some ways. Yeah. Answered. Okay. I do have a friend from another church who contests the idea of homosexuality by saying God created a man, then a woman as his partner. How do I refute this? Right. This from Genesis chapter 2, verse 18 to 24. The account of creation of Adam and Eve. And I don't have a lot of time left to go through all of that, but I'll ask the question, what was the process when God was creating Eve? Number one, what did God say? That's why, correct. Genesis said God does not want man, Adam, to be alone, right? Then what did God do? The next thing. All right. See, I think we can interact this way. Off topic, bubble tea. God put Adam to sleep. That's not really correct. What God did next was God brought all the animals to Adam. And amongst all this, no suitable companion was found. Is this about complementary of the sexes? If that is so, if it's about complementary of the sexes, then did God ask Adam to commit bestiality to test out, what is suitable? Adam didn't like the animals as companion. So God put Adam to sleep, and from his rib created Eve. And then Adam woke up and said, this is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, and then they bonded. One thing I must highlight, which I very, very often, they often translate the word as man and wife. That's BS, okay? Because in those days, there's no word for wife. The Hebrew word for wife is woman. Women were property. And therefore, that's how they understood it. So when they said that, this man and wife, no, it's man and woman. This is the legit translation, right? The translating it into wife is applying our modern day understanding and projecting it into the text. When the idea of marriage evolved and emerged, then they put it back into the text. But they always thought of it as man and woman, right? That's the word that they use. The word wife is their own. When the person translated it, they projected their assumptions onto that word. And we need to be very careful. Now, the question is, guess what? Adam had the choice. Adam knew what was a suitable partner for himself. Very often people don't realize that God gave Adam the option to choose from all this. It is not good for Adam to be alone. One. Adam was the one who made the decision who was the right companion. I wouldn't say is mate, it's companion. It is very different. Often people, so this is the thing that we need to understand. Perhaps it's telling us about human nature, that we are meant to be in relationship, not just with God alone. So for those people who advocate that LGBT people should remain celibate and single, this is the very text that I'll say. It's not good for Adam to be alone. It's not good for any human being to be alone. God was telling, Adam could have God and God alone, what? But that was not enough. God knew it, that it was not enough for Adam, right? Companion, co-worker, mate. So then, you think about that, Adam knew in his very core of his being who was a suitable partner. Likewise, for us LGBT folks, we know inside. It is an instinct. It is something that we know who we desire to be with. Because being LGBT or being gay or lesbian is not just about sex. It's about relating with someone. It's about bonding with someone. It's about being in relationship with someone. So this is something that, I would say. Now, I want to add on to this because likewise, a lot of the churches will use the same, because Jesus quoted this passage as well later on, I think in Matthew, and I'll probably talk about it next week as well. But then I go like, hey, you are really quite something lah. When Jesus was answering that question, when Jesus was making that statement, Jesus was answering a question about divorce. So I will give you the example. For example, that I went to see doctor, I have a cough, and the doctor said, don't eat oranges, right? Avoid oranges because they will get you phlegm, right, and everything. Now, when I tell someone else, a doctor told me not to eat oranges, is that don't eat oranges forever and ever? Or is it contextual? And so when Jesus answered the question, he said, for this reason, a man leaves his mother and father and be with the wife, with the woman, right? And together be one flesh. Jesus was responding to the question of divorce. Jesus was not answering a question about gay relationships at all. So to apply the answer to LGBT relationships is misapplication, I think. Yeah. So to another question. Is the point you made about Joseph and his dress reset all to a later episode with Potiphar's wife? Well, Joseph is known to be handsome, and so is David. Okay, a lot of these characters are good looking. And the question is that what role did Joseph play later, right? And you need to think about his resisting Potiphar's wife could be from the standpoint that maybe he's gay or maybe he's gender non-conforming. I don't know, but he certainly resisted Potiphar's wife's approach, right? And that benefited him. Otherwise, I think that we have a very different story. With regards to what I say higher good, would it be a slippery slope? I think that people will often say that then that's being relative, right? But I think there are few things in life that's absolute. Very few things that are absolute. And slippery slope. I think not all slippery slopes are bad in some ways. And we will need to, and when we are in relation with other people, right? When we are in community, we are in society, then we need to think about and contest what is the greater good for all in some ways, right? What are the values that we ascribe to as a community, as a society? And that's what morals are about, actually. Morals come from the word mors, which is the values most people hold, right? Maybe not all people hold. But I think that's always a shifting thing. Okay. Okay, this one I talked about. If non-straight, okay, this one, yes. Oh, okay. The Blue Letter Bible, when you, whoever this is, when you click on the concordance, right, and the Strong's number, the word, it will also show you where else in the Bible the same word has appeared. And then you scroll through all the different appearances of the word, right? Whether it is about making a coat of furs or animal skin and all that. If you are, I will not go through it again. If you want to, you stay back later, you message me privately, I'll go through it again with you later, right? God, the rationale of God created man and woman as his partner. No. I think that we assume that God created, that the companionship is hierarchical. Does the purpose of woman simply to keep men satisfied? No. Companionship is a mutuality thing. If God created man a servant, or like just now they said the word maid, that's a terrible word. Then there will be an unequal relationship. But here it says as a companion. A companion implies a relationship that's mutual. And I would think that at FCC we hold these as equal. All persons are created equal, right? And we hope to relate, in a way that's mutual and equal to each other, right? And so I'm very resisting the same, especially in weddings, and when people read the traditional text for wedding, right? Then the woman need to submit to the husband. I really cannot. Because all these traditions actually come from the past where women were not equals. Women were property. Even marching down the aisles is giving away the bride from the father to the groom. It is transaction of property, all right? Yeah. How do conservative Christians describe relation with David and Jonathan? They call it BFF, no? Best friends. Yeah. There is an actual Genesis recount. The focus on man and woman was only in the second. To clarify, there are two creation accounts in the Bible, right? And if you really study the text, right, there are two creation stories, just as there are two flood stories, right? One refers to God as Yahweh, one refers to God as Elohim. The first one, in the beginning, God created that story is almost God has no body one. It's just like a God that's transcendent and creating the universe and very, very big. But the Yahweh story, the Yahweh God is anthropomorphic, can walk around in the garden and all that. And the question is that one is a very grand creation story, one is a personalized creation story. And even when you look at this note, when you look at the second story, it almost seems that this Yahweh doesn't know what he's doing, right? Because it's not good for Adam to be alone. Then then bring the animals to show to Adam, right? And these two stories also contradict each other because the second account, the animals were created. Animals were created after Adam. Okay, and in the first account, the animals human beings come after the creation of animals. The order is different. Of course, there's a translation of the Bible that really altered this, because what they translated is if I'm not wrong, it's the NIV version. It says when Adam, after Adam was created, it says, now God created the animals, right? The now implies that God already created animals and God only brought the animals to Adam. But in the original text, there's no such word there to say because then God created the animals, which is very different. You know, when you say that now God created the animals, you say that's like saying that, referring to something that's happened already. But the word then God created the animals, it shows the order. But the translators actually want to harmonize and reduce the contradiction. They did that. But that's an aside. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's all the questions we have. Any more questions? Let me flip back to the questions. Yes, that's exactly what I just mentioned. The creation story seems contradictory. Yes, there is a contradiction between Genesis 1 and 2 because they are from two different accounts and probably two different theologies even, right? One calls God Elohim, one calls God Yahweh, right? And how we make sense is this: these are creation stories people told, and they understood, right? And they may not be, they are just narratives of how people understood the creation to be, right? How do humankind came about, or the universe came about? If the letter of the law describing the good is absolute, then that is legalism. And according to that, we should not have abolished slavery. God gave us a person and not a book for salvation. Oh, very good. And I can guess who wrote this. Peter, is that you? I think this point is very, very good, and that Peter made, that the letter of law is, because we need to think about this. Let me phrase it in a different way. And it's often easier to compare. And when I'm comparing, I'm not saying who's better and who's worse. Okay, we compare to our siblings who are Muslim, right? In Islam, the text, the holy text, the Quran, was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, right? And then he recited word for word, and they wrote it down, right? And very, very important is that the Quran is word for word from God. That's what the Muslims believe. That's what they hold. And the text is revealed through the person, the prophet. In Christianity, it's not the same, right? The Christianity is the text that reveals the person. It is through the Bible that we understand Christ, or we read about Christ, we get to know Christ. But the key thing that we know is the Word of God is not the Bible. The Gospel according to John chapter 1 just says the Word of God is Christ. We need to be very clear, not to confuse. I think this is something that we need to. It is the person of Jesus. Very different way of understanding. And so if we are stuck to the letter of the law, then we are stuck to legalism. But Christ showed a different way that is not absolute, a way that requires us to discern and work out with fear and trembling what is good, what's the right thing to do. And I think that's the thing that we need to compare, right? Cynthia asks, Jesus was a sinless man, but all men also got sex drive, right? So maybe Jesus also had some sexual encounters that were not recorded. Could it be? I have no idea, right? And next week, I will point to some parts that have a lot of question marks, right? This is because this is New Testament, right? But I would say that there's things that are not written down that we don't know about. Of course, there are people who did the movie The Last Temptation of Christ, and then people got all flustered up over it when it's only the dream sequence, right? Yeah. Would God have intended Adam and his mate Eve to procreate and multiply? Yes. But what has, but it's all to our existence procreation, right? And that's the thing. Is it all there is to our existence? It's just to procreate. Yeah. Is the story of Ruth and Naomi an LGBTQ story too? I don't take it as an LGBTQ story because I don't want to read into the story my own bias. It can be read as a LGBTQ story, but it is about Ruth declaring to Naomi, where you go, I will go. But this is a daughter-in-law with the mother-in-law. The husbands all died, and they made their way back to find a way to survive, right? And this is a story of them clinging on to one another. Is there something more to that story? I don't know. It's not conclusive. But I would not want to read too much into it because that will really be reading a lot extra to it. It could be just that the love of the daughter-in-law and the mother-in-law. It could be just that. It could be more, right? But the evidence doesn't point towards it. However, there's something interesting to the Ruth and Naomi story because where you go, I'll go, your God with my God, this is the verse, the passage from Ruth is often the passage that's read at weddings. I think some of you who have attended weddings will have heard this reading as well. And that's really like, hey, do you know that this is a text? No, this text that you're reading is a declaration of one woman to another woman. If we are true to the text, then this text is not meaning about love in the way we understand as a marriage, but a different kind of love. But people love to, people just take the passage as it is and just go with it. So when they say that I'm reading into the text, right? When we do queer theology, when we look at the Bible and we say, hey, David and Jonathan could be, in a relationship, what? Then I'm reading with some evidence to suggest what my interpretation is. But here, they are also reading into what the text does not really necessarily mean, right? It is a declaration of love from a daughter-in-law to the mother-in-law. And here they have taken it to apply it to marriage and to read it during the wedding. So they also do the same thing to the biblical text as well, right? Yeah. Yes, it is the same word that is used in Genesis, the word cleave. And one of the interesting thing, and then I'll go, it's 10:01 already. I want to end soon. But one of the interesting articles I recently read, and I haven't I couldn't find it in time for this talk. But one of the suggestions is that in Genesis, where a man leaves the father and mother and cleaves onto the woman, right? That's from Genesis 2, verse 18 to 24. What the scholar was actually, the biblical scholar was actually suggesting that it's not talking about marriage. It's actually talking about, love that causes you to even break family ties, even break your societal ties and whatnot. So what was happening quite often then was exogamy, meaning marrying outside of the tribe, marrying outside of the Israelites, which was a huge debate back then, right? There are verses in the Bible that prohibit marrying Moabites. And here Ruth is a Moabite, right? And Ruth ended up being a grandmother of David, and then also ended up being ancestor of Jesus, right? But here, so while there are prohibitions against exogamy, it seems that there are other parts that are supportive of exogamy. But what the verses in Genesis were saying that there are feelings, relationships that cause one to even leave one's, father and mother to bond with someone else and someone outside the family. Because if you read the text carefully, it says the Man will leave the father and mother and join with the woman. But if you think about marriage, it's the reverse. It's the woman who leaves the father and mother and join with the man. Why is it? So it's not describing the marriage as they understood it or we understand it, but actually about the scholar suggesting that it's actually about that there will be relationships that cause us to might even abandon our families, right? And even beyond that. Yeah. So some of the, thank you, Pauline. These are the resources that actually drew from, and they probably cover more areas that you might want to go and read and find out more. Let me look if there are any more questions. Yep, women kissing on lips is not so uncommon, and even men kissing on lips is not so uncommon in Middle Eastern culture. Yeah, for David and Jonathan, but they didn't just kiss on the lips. The relationship described, there's something more. And the accusation from Saul actually exposes something much more, right? Saul could have said something else, but why did he have to say that? Why, number one, talking about Jonathan's shame. Why about Jonathan's mother's nakedness, right? Why is it? And that nakedness has always got to do with sex, and that's the challenge lah. Of course, we cannot as I said already, you cannot firmly conclude that there was something going on there. But it cannot be erased. That possibility cannot be eliminated. No need to overthink. I think there's a need to overthink because too often we read with heteronormative lenses, and a lot of these things are obscured from us because of the heteronormative lenses. Because we refuse to entertain the possibility of other readings, right? And entertain even the possibility that it's there. What is it? Is it internalized homophobia that we all have that prevents us from seeing David and Jonathan as a gay relationship? Okay. Thank you very much for joining us today. And we will... Oh, Francesca says, my friend has a question. Were there trans people in Israel? How do we know? If they existed, how did they cope? How did they understand Deuteronomy 20? Oh, not wearing, I think Deuteronomy 22 should be about not cross-dressing, right? Search, huh? Yes, a woman must not wear men's clothing. Yeah, no. It's Deuteronomy 22. I think that, number one, the transgender people back then might probably be seen as eunuchs, right? That's one possibility. The other one is actually intersex persons. And I think you know, for everyone watching the recording, I cannot remember very accurately, right? But they actually described it in the either the Talmud or rabbinical writings, right? I think it's called Zamzam. And what they thought was, they thought that Sarah was Zamzam. That's why she was infertile for a very long time. And God worked a miracle in her for her to change. That's one of the, not the major interpretation or understanding. It's one of the minor approaches. Because what you need to understand how the rabbis and the Talmud and how they interpreted. There was no one interpretation. There's a majority reading, and there are alternative readings that they never erased. They kept all these alternative readings, and even those weird readings they kept, right? They saw the wisdom in keeping all these perspectives, right? Even the alternative readings. So one of the reading was that that Sarah was Zamzam, and that's why she was infertile, meaning that she was intersex or something like that, right? So that's one of the perspectives lah. But this is not in the text itself, not in the Bible, but in the Talmud and the other rabbinical writings, right? That are preserved as well. So that's it. Yeah. Tum tum. Yes, sorry. Not zam zam. Tum tum. Thanks, Jimmy. I know you are so much can remember it better than I do. I don't know where you read it, Jimmy, but correct, it's tum tum. Yeah. Yes. So I know all of you are tired. It's a very long lecture, 2 hours. Yeah, but I hope that it's beneficial to you. We will be posting this on, as we said, we will be posting on our YouTube channel. Do subscribe to it, Freecom Church. Just as one word, Freecom Church on YouTube, and we'll be posting stuff there. So join us again next week as we dive into the New Testament. And then the following week after that will be the sexual ethics. Yeah, thank you for joining us this evening. We will end the recording here, and then if people want to stay and chit chat, please do so. I'll be hanging around with you also. Yeah. Thank you and have a good night.